Hello and welcome to my gouache demo that I have put together for you. My name is Rachel Dowd. This is my first video that I've ever posted with my voice included in it, so might be a little herky-jerky at first until I find my stride. I've had lots of people ask me for demos and tutorials or online workshops or that kind of thing, and so I have decided to try out something new, and I'm going to be opening a Patreon account and posting gouache and oil painting demos, full-length demos. They will be probably somewhere between an hour and 2 hours long each. It depends on the complexity and the size of the painting. The oil painting demos will probably be longer. The gouache painting demos will be a little shorter. This particular demo that I'm sharing with you here, as you can see, is just under an hour, so this will probably be average for the gouache demos. And as of right now, I will only be offering full-length demo videos on my Patreon account for both gouache and oil painting. They will be separate memberships, one for gouache and one for oil painting. And maybe down the line I will add some more benefits as I get my feet under me and figure out what I'm able to handle. Other things I'm thinking about offering on Patreon are live art chats where we can just get together as a group of artists and chat about things or talk about questions that you have from any of my demos or tutorials. I'd be happy to answer those. I might also offer personal critiques on your artwork. That would be a higher tier in Patreon, of course. I might offer some still life and maybe some photos from around my farm as photo references for you to paint from that you can use copyright free. And I possibly might include some discounts to my online store on my website. Those are things that I'm thinking about and trying to figure out how I want this to work for me and for you and for everyone to benefit a lot from it. So this particular demo that I'm sharing with you, I wanted to share with you for free and to give you an idea of what my demos would look like. My oil painting demos will be slightly different because I will be working on an easel, and so the camera won't be quite so nice and square as it is right here. It'll be a little bit off to the side because I can't have a camera right above my head. So I hope this is something that you're excited about because I'm really excited about it. It makes it easier for me to reach out to so many of you and offer some of my teaching to you without having to travel and without you having to travel. So I love that. I hate that I can't see all of you face to face because that is one of the many blessings of having an in-person workshop. But anyway, I think this will be beneficial for everyone. It's very affordable and easy to do on your own time when you feel ready to learn and have the headspace to learn. So I'm just going to jump right into this demo and talk about it as I would any other demo without all of the stuff I just talked about. This is my gouache setup, and my setup is very simple, very easy to acquire all of these materials. You can see here that I'm laying out my paint on my enamel butcher tray palette. I will list the colors real quick so you know which ones I'm laying out. I first laid out permanent white, and then burnt sienna, turquoise blue, ultramarine blue deep, rose violet, geranium, let's see, marigold, and then this one is cadmium yellow lemon. And the very last one that I put out is gray number 2. And all of these are Holbein gouache paints. I love Holbein because they flow really well. They're not grainy like some of the brands are, and they're not sticky. I don't like sticky gouache that makes long strings sometimes as it's starting to dry. This one won't do that. And here I've got a basic artist tape that I'm using to protect my edges so I have a nice clean crisp edge. Sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't, because I do like the rough edges that the paint makes sometimes. For this one, I wanted to make it nice and clean and crisp. And this tape won't ruin the paper underneath when you pull it off. The paper that I'm using is Strathmore 400 series mixed media tan toned paper. That's a long title. It's an excellent paper. It doesn't buckle too much. If I end up painting many layers, it will start buckling a little bit, but as it dries, it goes flat again. I've never had a problem with it. I really enjoy using this paper. My water cup is a collapsible water cup. I like using that so I can travel with it easier. My brushes, if you're from the United States, you might have a United Art and Education store near you. That's where I got these brushes. These are United Art brand. I think they're called Synthetic Sable watercolor brushes. And they're super cheap, like $3, $4. They're super cheap, and I love them. For gouache, it's better to use cheap brushes because gouache is kind of gritty. It's smooth, but it does have a little bit of grit to it, and you will ruin a really nice brush with gouache paint. And these, I don't care about ruining them because I can always go get another one for $3. But they've lasted a long time. I really enjoy using them. I have a 1/2-inch flat. That's the one I'm using right now. 1/2-inch flat brush. And there's 2 other brushes. The other flat is a 1/4-inch flat. I don't use that for this painting. I have it out, but I never pick it up. And the other one is a round, and I can't remember what size it is. But you can see relative to the 1/2-inch and the 1/4-inch how big it is. So when I started this painting, I started with a rough sketch. I was not precious with the lines, with the drawing. I just wanted to kind of mark the general placement of the large shapes. I didn't want to get too specific because the more specific my drawing is, the more specific my painting will be, and it will make it stiffer and have less movement and less life. So I try to keep my drawing as simple as I possibly can, all the while trying to include just enough information for me to place things in their appropriate spots. I don't usually start with the darkest darks, but I have done that with this painting. When I look at a photo or the scene that I'm painting, I'm always trying to think about what do I feel like I need to paint first, or what do I feel like I want to paint first? What do I know how to paint first? So that's why I chose the darks for this particular one, because I wanted to place the lights over top of the darks a little bit. I wanted them to overlap a little bit. I don't like placing darks over lights as much in gouache. It doesn't translate as well as painting light over dark. There are exceptions. There's always exceptions to every rule or reason for why I or anyone do anything with painting, but for this particular painting, that's why I did that. You'll notice I'm not being too careful with the edges. I'm not trying to stay in the lines. I'm thinking shapes, values, and colors. That's all I'm thinking about. I, I kind of see it as a mosaic, the paint or the photo. I'm looking at it as a mosaic and imagining the individual shapes, values, and colors of each little piece and how they fit together and what they look like next to each other. I'm not just staring at one particular spot and thinking, what color is that? What value is that? What shape is that? I have to look at all of the other shapes and the colors next to it to compare. And because if you stare at just one color and focus on that indefinitely, your eyes play tricks on you and you will see something that's not there. And then when you lay the next color down and you look at just that color, it's not going to read right because they don't look right together. Their relationship is not the right relationship. This one particular shape right next to another particular shape, they won't read right. Their relationship between each other needs to be the same relationship. It doesn't even need to be the same color or the right color necessarily. If it's the right value relationship, it will read right. So you'll see, I change the values of some of the things after I've got them down because I don't have the whole painting done yet. I have to see how they look in relationship to the other colors and the other values and the shapes that I'm placing next to them later on. So I'm starting to move into the midtones. I'm trying to make the shape turn a little bit. I want you to see the turn of his chest. I want you to see the turn of his back and the turn of his face. So the midtones, to me, are more important than the dark tones and the light tones because that's where the color is. That's where the magic happens, in my opinion. So I'm more careful with the midtones than I am the darks or the lights. Trying to paint more in the midtones than I am trying to rely on the high contrast, high chroma to communicate strong light. I'm really trying to focus on the midtones lately. That's where all of your master artists really excelled. Sargent, Sorolla, their midtones, they almost painted exclusively in midtones, really. And their paintings are just incredible, and they're masters of midtones. So I'm trying to grow in that area. I'm trying to focus on midtones more than anything as far as color and value is concerned. As you can see, I don't use a lot of water. I use very little water. Gouache is a water medium. It's actually opaque watercolor. If you add too much water, it will look like a watercolor, which isn't a bad thing, and I do glaze a little bit with watered down gouache to change colors a little bit, sometimes closer to the end of a painting. But in general, I try to use thick paint with very little water, as little water as I can get away with to make the paint flow smoothly. And here, I think I just laid in the shadow side of his bill, and his bill is yellow, and yellow in shade is almost always either green or brown. And in this case, I think his bill leans green, which I thought was beautiful. I love that green shadow next to the yellow and the light. So beautiful. Here I'm working on his chest and catching all of that, trying to capture all of that warm tone in his chest and focusing on trying to communicate a change in plane, a turn. I want you to see the turn in his body. I want him to look around. So here I'm painting a little bit of a transition line in between the light and the dark to show the turn of his chest a little bit better. And now I'm going to move into the shadow side of his back where he has white feathers. And white is probably my most favorite color to paint because white is every color under the sun. And it's so fun to paint. There's so many colors in white. So on his body, his white feathers in the shade are this brilliant, vibrant, light blue color. And I just love that. It's just very yummy. So I'm working on that part, the shadow side of his body. I'm trying to keep the values accurate. I'm not trying to stick to the values that I see in the photo so much because photography lies and it makes the darks darker and the lights lighter. So I want to save my highlights for some choice few areas. I don't want to make my highlights as light as some of the lights are in the photo. And I also don't want to make my darks as dark as some of the darks in the photo. And one of the things that I think I changed a little bit was the value of this shadow on his back was a little bit darker in the photo, and I wanted to lighten it a little bit and allow a little more light in there. And I hope you can see here that I'm really focusing on just placing shapes in there. I'm not even staying I'm not staying true to the photo. I'm not trying to paint every feather, every little dot, every little spot exactly the way it is in the photo. I don't really care. I just want it to communicate correctly the way he looks, and it doesn't have to look exactly like the photo. I really wanted to capture this beautiful shadow on his side, and if I add too much detail in there, it might distract from it a little bit. So I don't really want to include a ton of little dots everywhere. That might distract from that beautiful color. You'll see I do add more detail later on in there, but not a lot. Here, I think I'm working on the lights on his back, and I'm jumping right in. I'm not finishing any one area before I move on to another. I'm trying to lay in each area separately. I mean, each large shape sequentially, and then I will go back and carve into those a little bit more and bring in more detail. And I'm mostly just focused on getting the large shapes in because I want to see how they relate together. If I finish an area before I've moved on to the next section, it's not going to look right. It looks right. If I make it look right, it's only looking right because of the colors that are around it. And in this case, it's just the craft colored paper. So I want to make sure that I don't spend too much time on one area and waste my energy only to have to go back and change it again because it's not reading right, because I've changed the other shapes around it. So that's a big time saver for me, is I don't focus on one spot for too long, because then it doesn't become precious and I'm not trying to save it. I can always go back and paint over it and change it later if it's not reading right after I've placed another shape or another color next to it. Here I'm putting in the light side of his bill. Really focusing on the silhouette of this shape because that is what's going to read bill, duck bill, better than anything. It's a very important shape, so I'm really focusing on the silhouette of it and making sure that it's the correct proportions and the correct outline. for that shape. His bill is a little less forgiving than his body as far as the brush strokes. It needs to be fairly accurate, or he just won't look right. Won't look like a duck bill. Here I'm laying in some of the feathers and the light part of his back. Again, not focusing on actual feathers. I'm not even really looking at the photo at this point. I'm just placing shapes where I think they should go to read the way I want it to read. So here I'm mixing up the water. I decided to stop painting him for a little bit and start putting in the other shapes around him before I add any more detail to him. I want to make sure he reads correctly with the colors that I'm choosing. And sorry about the glare. The gouache dries really fast. You'll see the colors show up here real soon. It is a little bit too dark at this point. I do figure that out in a few minutes. I'm looking at the photo and I'm seeing a gradient in the water. Obviously there's the burnt oranges and reds that are in the water. Those are from the fall trees, the reflection of the fall trees in the water. But as you start getting into the watercolor, it's lighter and it slowly gets darker as the water comes toward you, towards the bottom of the painting. So I'm trying to get that gradient in. I'm trying to make it lighter behind him and slowly get darker as it reaches the bottom of the page, bottom of the painting. And this is where I'm carving into his shape a little bit. I am being a little more careful with my edges here, and I'm painting over top of some of the lines just a touch to really shape up his silhouette. And I do this on purpose. I like to cut into it because, for one, I think it actually helps with the drawing a little bit to be more accurate. And also, really, the biggest reason why I do this is because it helps keep him from looking like a sticker. It keeps him from looking like he's been pasted on. Painting over top of some of the edges, there is a little bit of transparency there. You are seeing a tiny sliver of that paint that's been painted over, and it helps meld him into the scene a little bit. And I really do this with any painting where the subject is kind of smack in the middle of the composition and they're not grounded by being cut off on one of the edges of the format. So that's one way that I help keep the subject from sticking out too far and looking out of place, looking like it was pasted on. So with gouache, I usually paint really thick, but for this particular spot that I just painted, I painted a little thinner. I added more water because I wanted it to, like watercolor, mix a little bit, blend a little bit more smoothly than I can do with just the brush. So I'm utilizing the water, the properties of water in the gouache to help me make that gradation between the reflection of the fall trees in the water and then the water touching them. So I tried to make that transition a little bit smoother by allowing the water to allow the colors to flow together a little bit better. And here I'm working down the other side of him, darkening the color of the water as I go, because I want the water to get darker and darker as I get closer to the bottom of the painting. And I'm not even thinking water, I'm thinking shapes. I'm looking at the photograph, I'm looking at the water, and I'm seeing lots of colors, lots of shapes in the water, and really it's the reflection of the duck in the water. But I'm just looking at the shapes. I'm looking at the shapes, and I'm not worried about making it look like a duck reflecting in the water. I just really want to capture those shapes as I see them. And this is how I work plein air as well. I try to just focus on shapes. So I'm looking at the darks in the water. The darks in the water are kind of a darker green color. So I'm just smacking in all of those dark shapes, and I'm using the same green color. And this is the ripples. The ripples in there. The ripples of water have different planes, and they're all reflecting different things. Some parts of the little ripples are reflecting the sky. Some parts are reflecting what is behind the water. Some of it's reflecting what's in front of the water. There's so many colors in water because of all the different things that it's reflecting. Some of it's even reflecting the fall trees in the background. You'll see I'll put in some oranges in the water, and those are the trees being reflected into the little ripples. But for right now, I'm focused on that. I'm looking at the photograph, and I'm seeing that these dark shapes in the water all are typically about the same color, same value. Here I'm making this a little bit darker. It's reflecting his head, and his head is darker, so I'm making his reflection a little bit darker as well. Here I'm measuring how tall he is. Reflections are, I have heard it said that reflections are always the exact height of the subject that you're looking at, but I've seen that not be true. So I'm not sure what the rule is, but I looked at the photo and I saw that it was exactly a mirror image of the duck. Not an image, but the height of the duck was the same as the height of his reflection in the water. So I just wanted that to be accurate, the perspective and the drawing. So I was measuring with my brush how tall he was, and then I moved that down into the water to see where the top of his head would end, which is actually just a little bit lower than the tape. So his head's cut off by the tape a little bit. I'm putting in all the reflections, and the reflections are darker, less saturated. You don't really want to make your reflections of anything, whether it's trees or birds or anything, to be exactly as vibrant and bold as the subject itself. Reflections are always less than, less saturated, less light, less dark, less vibrant, less chroma. So that's what I am focused on. That I'm looking at the relationship between what I've painted in his reflection and his actual body. I want it to be the right relationship. Here I'm working a little bit more on his bill. I realized I painted the shadow side of his bill a little bit too dark, so I'm lightening it up a little bit. And now I'm working on the darker blues of the water. I decided to go ahead and start with the darkest of the blue, so I have a starting point. Now I know that the darkest blue, I think I might lighten it up just a little bit. Yep, I lightened it up a little bit. So now this is the darkest blue, and I know that my gradient needs to go between that value of blue to the value of blue that's up by the duck. And I'm just kind of work on that as I move up to the lighter section of the water. While I'm doing this, I'm paying attention to, again, the shapes in the water. I'm looking at the shapes of his reflection. You see, it's not, his reflection is contorted by the ripples in the water, so it makes it all wiggly. And I love that. It's very interesting to look at. It's fun to paint. So I'm trying to make sure I'm focusing on just that shape. I don't want to paint his reflection exactly like he looks above the water, because then it wouldn't read that it's a reflection. So I'm removing from my mind, the word reflection of a duck. I'm just looking at the shapes that are showing up in the water. Here I'm varying my brush strokes in the water. I'm trying to add a little bit of interest, a little bit of just a subtle shift in value, subtle shifts in temperature, blending just a little bit. And now I'm thinking and trying to figure out what I need to work on next. I think I start working on those darks again in the water. Yeah, making his reflection in different areas a little bit darker, stand out a little bit more. I'm looking at the shapes in the water and the shapes of the ripples that are in the water. I want to make sure that those lines are accurate. I won't, because then the water won't go back in space. There won't be the right perspective. The ripples the closer the ripples get to you, the bigger they are and the wider apart they are. The farther away the ripples get from you, the closer they get together, the flatter they become and the skinnier they become. And that is how we read distance and perspective in the water. One of the ways that we see that. So you'll see here that the video changed a little bit. That is because, unfortunately, my camera filled up and stopped recording. But I caught it pretty quickly, so you didn't miss a whole lot. As you can see, I added some of the reflection of the fall trees, the orange trees in the background, into the ripples in the water. And I'm still working on those water shapes, the different shapes. I added some of the background ripples. I put more in here soon. And I'm kind of working a little bit wet into wet. I'm bouncing around and going from one shape to another, and I'm letting them blend together a little bit. Moving into some smaller shapes. I always work large shapes to small shapes. I try never ever to paint any details in the beginning. I'm just worried about getting those big shapes in, and then I move to smaller shapes and smaller shapes and smaller shapes until I'm in the final details. And I only put the final details in the areas that I really want you to look. So here I'm adding the lighter parts of the water, and I'm kind of cutting into the reflection of the trees. It's all water back there. It's not actually trees. So the water reflections need to show up within the tree reflection. Or the sky reflection, rather. What you're looking at is a reflection of the sky next to the reflection of the trees. And I really wanted to make it lighter around his head because it will help his head pop out more. That's the focal point of this little painting. And you can see there that I made the water reflections closer together and skinnier and flatter as it moved back in space, and that really helped. You can really see that, how that changed the way that looked almost instantly. The water suddenly looks like it's going back in space, instead of it just being a big flat shape back there behind his head. Adding more highlights. And this is catching some of the overhead light a little bit, so it will dry darker than it looks in the video right now. It's not quite that bright. That would be too bright if that's how it really looked. Now I'm thinking of adding some temperature shifts in the water. So I just laid a little shape down and I wanted to see how it looked. And I think I decided that it was too saturated, so I wanted to desaturate it a little bit, and I also wanted to lighten it up a little bit. Water really has every color of the rainbow in it, and you almost never go wrong adding a little bit of every color into water. I love adding greens and pinks, blue of course, purples, especially up closer to the bottom of the painting. I'll add some purple here in a little bit, I think. I'm trying to stay within that value. So you'll see that I added a different color in there, but I'm trying to keep it the same value as the blue that I'm painting on top of, because I don't want it to read as a value change more than I want it to read as a temperature change. As you can see, I warmed it up a little bit, so it's a little bit of a warmer green that I'm putting on top of the cooler green. Warmer blue on top of the cooler blue. And that adds vibration, that adds interest, that makes the painting vibrate a little bit more, add a little more life and movement to it. I love doing that. And I don't usually do value and temperature shifts until near the end of the painting. I'm starting to finish up with more final details here, and it can take a little bit of time to really get those last details in because you want them to be placed accurately. That's the reflection of his collar, his white collar in the water, and I realized it was just a little bit too light. Now gouache always dries, okay, so light colors in gouache dry darker, and dark colors in gouache dry lighter. Everything trends toward the middle tones, which is probably why I love gouache so much, because I'm always trying to paint more mid-tone than anything, and the inherent nature of the way that gouache dries only helps me do that a little bit more without me even trying, really, sometimes. Adding more little details in the water, adding some darks behind him for the ripples. Really trying to get the arc of the ripples correct. I don't want to just draw circles around him. I want them to look like real ripples in the water. So I'm trying to get the drawing accurate in that. There's a little bit of reflected warmth right there next to his body where the water, or the water's picking up the reflection of the white feathers in the shadow. And the reflection's a little bit warmer, as you can see there. Trying to pull out those ripply shapes of his reflection a little bit more strongly. Again, I'm really focusing on those shapes that are in the water. I don't really care what it is that it's reflecting. Obviously, this part is reflecting the dark part of his tail, but I'm not trying to make it look like his tail. I'm just copying the shapes that are showing up in the reflection of the water. Now I'm working on some more details in his body. Just indicating a few little individual feathers. He's a little bit mottled looking with his brown feathers, so I wanted to make sure I communicated that. Moving into more and more details on him, the duck, now that I've mostly finished up the water, I think. a couple little tail feathers there. And you'll see that I'm really careful about his eyes. As far as drawing accuracy are concerned, for an animal or a human, eyes are, you have to get them right to make it read right. So you'll see me go back and forth a couple times. I'm trying to get his eye just right. Really focusing on that silhouette of the shape of the side of his face. And here you see the video shifted again. I had to pause it to go pick up my girls from school. And I sat back down to finish it when I got back home. It's so nice to be able to stop what I'm doing and go take care of home life stuff and then be able to come back and pick up where I left off. Here I'm adding some more movement in the water. I felt like the water might have been a little bit too still, so I'm adding just a little bit of movement by varying the value of the water a little bit and the temperature as well. Here I'm changing the silhouette of the left side of his face a little bit. I felt like it needed, and you'll see now I'm moving on to a smaller brush. The larger brush wasn't doing it for me, and I really need to get it accurate. So I'm moving to a smaller brush. I'm getting the light part of his eye in on the right side of his face. Being very, very careful about placement and drawing, making sure that my drawing is accurate in this area. And here I think I work on the left side of his face a little bit, shaping that up with the small brush. Nope, I'm working on his eye. Couldn't remember what it was I worked on. Maybe next time I do a video like this and I start working on a highly detailed spot like this one, I will push the camera down a little bit closer so you can see more closely the tiny little marks that I'm making. Here I'm working on the details in his bill. I love that little dark spot at the end of his bill. It's so cute. And his nostrils, just two little dark dots, or mid-tone dots really, but again they need to be placed accurately. And I noticed that the shadow of the bottom side of his bill had a little bit of purple in it, so I'm adding that in here. Always looking for color and temperature shifts within my value shapes because that adds a lot of life to your painting. I think here I'm brightening up his bill a little bit. honing in on that shape, the light side of his bill, making sure the drawing is accurate here. It's probably one of my number one recommendations for any artist, including myself. I don't even follow this advice all the time, but drawing skills are everything. A daily sketchbook practice is going to help your art excel so much faster than anything that you do. Definitely keep painting and keep practicing that as much as you can, as often as you can. But if you only have 15 minutes every day to allocate towards art, sketch something from life, draw, and that will help your skills in painting so much more than anything that you can do. Here I'm adding some more details into his feathers. Looking at where these shapes touch and meet and how they transition, and seeing if there's any changes that need to be made there. And coming up on the very end of the painting here. Last minute details. This is where I'm trying to decide what's worth adding and what's not worth adding. You never have to add everything that you see. I'm only trying to communicate a feeling and a personality of the stuck, and once I got it, I want to stop. I don't, overworking it is just not going to help. It's not going to help it look any better. So I'm sitting back and looking at it right now, trying to think of how does it look as a painting. I'm not looking at the photograph anymore. I'm just looking at the painting, and I'm thinking, what does it need? What still needs help? And I noticed that the left side of his body the left side of his face just needed a little bit more in it to fill him out. The photo actually doesn't, I think the photo looks a little bit more flat, but I felt like the left side of his face looked flatter, but I felt like it needed to be puffed out a little bit more and filled out, and it looks better once I did that, even though it wasn't in the photo. I'm now looking at things I want to change that aren't necessarily in the photo. What's going to make this painting read better? What's going to make his personality stand out better? And I think this is about it. I don't really do anything else. You can see how much longer it takes to add in those tiny details. It requires a little bit more careful thought, a little more accuracy. I'm more worried about too many details than not enough, is what I'm worried about the most. I felt like the shape of his tail was important, and I wanted to add in those details. Again, using this small brush and thick paint with very little water in the paint. I want these last detail marks to sit on top of what I've painted. If I add too much water, it'll sink in a little bit more. So here I've reached the very end of my painting, and I'm pausing a lot to analyze exactly if anything else is needed. And I really don't want to make a single mark more than what it needs. So I'm thinking and analyzing and trying to make well-calculated decisions before I stop. I hope you really enjoyed this demo. I hope that the things that I said were worth listening to. I hope that maybe this helps you with your art practice and inspires you to try your own gouache painting. I hope that you learned a little bit from it, and I hope this gets you excited maybe about some more of my demos that I will be posting on Patreon soon. I'm going to start in November, and I will be posting on my social media when those new videos are added onto my Patreon account. So be sure to be on the lookout for those, and let me know in the comments what you thought of this demo, and if you have any ideas of how I can make it better or what you really liked about it. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I look forward to making more of these for you. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.